So with that being said, let's get back into this whole thing. We were talking about deregulation and trickle down.
Yes. You know, there's a fabulous book out there called Wealth and Democracy. And it's written by an economist, and the book is, many people would find it dry. I found it riveting because it starts with the pre-revolutionary America, and it takes you all the way through to about 2002. That's when the book was published. And it talks about the effects of government decision-making on wealth in America and what it does for the lower class, what it does for the middle class, what it does for the 1%, and so forth. Okay. And it's interesting because we heard this thing during the Reagan years, the trickle down, right?
Yes.
And the idea, if you're not familiar with it, is that you want to put more money in the hands of people who are well-to-do, because when was the last time a poor person gave you a job? That's the logic, correct? Right. You generate jobs, you generate employment by capitalizing people who are wealthy, and then would they take that money and they go out and create new ventures, and those ventures hire people and so forth.
I have been offered jobs by poor people, but none of them paid very well.
Right, not jobs you wanted.
Right.
Okay. So one of the interesting things I found when I was reading the book on economics was that one of the distinctions I think is important to draw when we look at deregulation, and hence the trickle-down effect, which are sort of hand in a handshake there, is that you have the manufacturing sector. You have perhaps lately, in historical terms, more recently, the high-tech sector. And you have the financial sector. Okay. Now, the manufacturing sector, there are jobs, oftentimes a lot of jobs in comparison to others. In the information technology sector, there's jobs. Oftentimes not as many jobs as in the manufacturing, but they're higher paid, higher skill jobs.
Sure.
Okay? Then you go to the financial sector, and there's virtually no jobs that matter. Okay? So one of the things that I found when I read through this book is that when deregulation is pitched and the trickle down is pitched, what typically happens is there is, and this is proven statistically in the book, this isn't just me concluding it myself, he's concluding it, the economist. What happens is you have a little bit of a benefit for the average Joe. Okay? Obviously, in today's America, there's not much manufacturing, so you're not going to have a huge bump there. Okay? You're going to have a bigger bump in the IT world. Okay? But what he pointed out was that most of the growth that occurs during deregulation is in the financial sector. And he plots how in each of these deregulation cycles, usually driven by Republicans because it's part of the Republican ethos, right, is deregulation. Typically what happens is the middle class doesn't move or moves ever so slightly. And the billionaire class leaps, okay? They make thousands of times the advances in their personal wealth that the middle class does. So it seems like, politically speaking, not economically speaking, politically speaking, it has been used as a pitch to say, let me tell you how we're going to benefit you, the average American. And intuitively, it does make sense. Okay, you're going to help capitalize these guys who've already proven they're successful in various industries. They're going to create new industries and more jobs. The trickle-down effect, intuitively, it rings true. But the way the deregulation has been handled, it hasn't actually turned out to be as true as the pitch. It's almost a come on to get the voters to say, yes, let's do that. But the real, true recipients of it are the 1%. Now, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against wealth. I've been talking here about, big corporations and the average Joe and trickle down. So people might think I'm against wealth. I'm not against wealth, okay? I would like to be wealthy. Let me be very clear. I would like everybody.
Then you could pay for a third Maybach.
That's right. I would like everybody to be wealthy, right? There's nothing wrong with wealth. The problem is that the wealth in the financial sector is usually what we call paper money, okay? It's not actually real wealth. That's why you have something where, the stock market takes a huge adjustment.
It's leverage.
And so-and-so lost, $3 billion of his net worth, okay? It's not real money.
Right.
Okay? And it's not real jobs, and it's not real products, okay? It's playing the paper game. And of course, those people then have the opportunity to take that wealth and put it into things like, say, real property, where their wealth is then secured and it's no longer just this paper wealth. And you've probably seen the statistics as well as I have, that something like, the top 3% owns like, whatever the numbers are, 96% of all the wealth in America, and then the rest of it split between the rest of it.
Right.
And one of the points that the book makes is that that was very common in, say, Europe before the revolution in America, when the aristocracy had all the money and the rest of the people lived on scraps. So he draws the distinction that where we appear to be taking ourselves is backwards into that paradigm where there is an aristocracy. They're not called kings. They're not called barons. They're called, the multi-billionaires. They're called, the power brokers, the power elites. And they are the new aristocracy. And there's a game being played on us that pitches that we're going to benefit. We may not. But what always happens, 100% of the time without fail, is the top 1% get dramatically wealthier.
And here at the Harper Library in the University of Chicago, our distinguished guests have their own ideas too. So let's join them now. It seemed to me he was saying that the golden age for America, when it was truly a land of opportunity, was the late 19th, early 20th century. No regulations, no permits, no red tape.
I would argue that the government played a decisive role in an enormous grant to the railroads in creating an American capitalist economy. And secondly, if you go back to that golden age, you find that the government constantly intervened in a rather characteristic way. It used troops against strikers. American labor history has been the most violent, bloody class struggle anywhere in the world. And the government, up until 1932, the law, the courts, the society, always sided with business, always sided against working people. Therefore, I would argue that both economically and in terms of repressing the attempts of people to assert their freedom, government prior to the rise of the welfare state in this country was more or less owned by business.
Mildred Friedman.
Michael Harrington is seeing the hole in the barn door, and he's not looking at the barn door itself. The plain fact is, during the whole of that period, while government did intervene from time to time, and mostly to do harm, I agree with him that government intervention was, in the main, not a good thing, tariffs, for example. On the other hand, throughout that whole period, government spending, federal government spending, central government spending, never was more than 3% of the national income. It was trivial. The land grants to the railroads were a minor factor. I don't approve of them. I'm not saying they were a good thing, but they were a very minor factor. One has to have a sense of proportion, and that goes to the whole discussion. I am not an anarchist. I am not in favor of eliminating government. I believe we need a government. But we need a government that sets a framework and rules within which individuals, pursuing their own objectives, can work together and cooperate together. And they work together and cooperate together not only in economic areas.
Well, what's your... Michael Harrington?
I just think that two things. One, to view freedom positively, I think people over 65 years of age in the United States today are freer now because of Medicare. I do not think that the freedom to die from the lack of medicine was a very good thing. Secondly, related to industrialists, I think that one of the startling things about American history is that when Franklin Roosevelt was saving the system from itself, the main beneficiaries were screaming bloody murder at him for being a traitor to his class, when he was in fact the salvation of that class. And I think therefore if you look at our history, I do think you find a tremendous myopia on the part of industrialists, and you find that the positive increments to our freedom, interestingly enough, have not come from the college graduates, but often from people with, not from the best people. It's come from working people, it's come from poor people, it's come from blacks and Hispanics and the like.
Milton, would you reply, but then tell us why you took us to Hong Kong to prove something?
Sure. Unaccustomed as I am to agreeing with Michael Harrington, I will agree in part with what he's just said. I do not believe it's proper to put the situation in terms of industrialists versus government. On the contrary, one of the reasons why I am in favor of less government is because when you have more government, industrialists take it over. And the two together form a coalition against the ordinary worker and the ordinary consumer. I think business is a wonderful institution, provided it has to face competition in the marketplace, and it can't get away with something except by producing a better product at a lower cost. And that's why I don't want government to step in and help the business community. Now, I want to go to your question about Medicare. There are many people who have benefited from Medicare, but you're not looking at the cost side. What has happened to the people who are paying for it? It isn't, we don't have a free good. It isn't coming from nowhere. And are they benefiting from it in a cost-effective way? Those are the questions. It's demagoguery, if you'll pardon me, Michael Harrington, to say the people who have Medicare are freer. Of course, in one dimension. But they themselves have been paying all their lives. And have they gotten a good bargain? At the moment they have. The young men, the young working people who are going into Social Security now, they're going to get a very raw deal indeed.